Welcome to Who Runs This Park, a podcast where you are invited into the hearts and stories of those who have committed their careers to the protection and preservation of our great national parks. Who Runs This Park aims to be a catalyst for inspiration, highlighting all that goes into managing our national parks and building a sense of appreciation for the invaluable beauty, diversity, and history of our protected lands. Today is a special episode in that we have two guests with us today. We have Cicely Muldoon, the Yosemite Superintendent, and Frank Dean, the Yosemite Conservancy President and CEO. Given these two guests, we get to get into the nitty-gritty of Yosemite and how it's run, maintained, and get to dive into how the two of these remarkable individuals have partnered together to preserve and protect the gem that Yosemite is. Another fun aspect about this interview is that I'm actually recording it in person in Yosemite, which is hard to complain about. To give you some quick background on our guests, Cicely, a 35-year-plus veteran of the Park Service, has been superintendent of Yosemite since 2020, and Frank has been president and CEO of Yosemite Conservancy since 2015. So we get both of their insights and then their hopes for the future of the park as well. Well, I'm sure most of you know of Yosemite. To make sure we're all on the same page, Yosemite is world-renowned for its dramatic granite formations, including El Cap and Half Dome, which are legendary among climbers. It's also home to some of North America's tallest waterfalls, giant sequoia trees, and glacially carved landscapes. Yosemite's creation, advocated for by John Muir, helped inspire the creation of the National Park Service itself. I'm honored and humbled to be talking to both of you. Cicely and Frank, welcome to Who Runs This Park.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maddie.
All right. Well, I wasn't going to ask this, but Cicely made me curious. I'd love to hear about each of y'all's craziest experience you've had working in Yosemite.
Okay, Maddie's just setting me up on this one. I was talking before we started today about what was I going to pick, because so many crazy things happen at Yosemite. It seems like every single day, but there was one time I always have the park radio on at home because so much happens here all the time. I like to stay in touch. And I heard a call out to our paramedics about a baby being born in a bathtub. You know, that's just not something that happens at most parks, I think. But Yosemite is like a small town. So things that happen here in the village, there's a courthouse, there's a school, there used to be a jail. There's all those things that are the small urban community has. So I guess maybe a baby being born in the bathtub wasn't that weird.
Yeah, that is crazy. And to level set for people, I learned this yesterday because, as I mentioned, we're at Yosemite. And I went into the valley to do some hiking. It was raining, and I saw this girl carrying a Starbucks cup on the hike, and I was like, you know, I'm one for like being in nature, but I admit I like my front country luxuries. And immediately I was like, where's that from? And she's like, oh, at the lodge. And I was like, what? I had no idea there was a Starbucks in Yosemite. So definitely, yeah, like a small little town in the valley. Frank, what about you?
Well, just to riff on the coffee thing, the Starbucks happened because a previous superintendent loved morning coffee, and the coffee that they served at the deli maybe 10 years ago was horrible. And so he said, why can't we get Pete's or Starbucks in here? So a couple of years later they did, and I know there was some kind of eye rolling that went on by some of the staff and others, locals, like this is maybe inappropriate, but I will say it's popular. There's usually a big line there, and they do have good coffee. So
yeah, I would imagine that there's a pizza place, I guess, in Curry Village, and I would imagine that after a long climb or you finish some big thing, that tastes
right
out of this world.
It's like gold.
Yes,
but there are some differences. Starbucks wanted a big sign out front, like they typically do, and the Park Service said no. So they didn't want to have it just look like any other kind of a store. It sort of blends in.
Oh, it does. I had a hard time finding it. I was like driving through Curry Village. I drove through Yosemite Village. So I explored the whole valley yesterday on search for a Starbucks.
Mission accomplished then.
Yes, exactly. I got a pumpkin spice latte.
Awesome.
I guess one of my craziest experiences was we were camping at Tuolumne Meadows, and we were a campground, which is in the high country. You can drive there, but it's like 8,500 feet. And we were out for the day on a hike. I came back to my campsite with my wife, and a family had moved into our campsite. And they didn't know because our truck wasn't there, and they just thought, it was empty. But there was this cute family from Orange County, California, and we just didn't have the heart to say, okay, out of here, right? So we fit our truck in the same little spot, and I noticed they had all their food out. There was dinner time. They had all the food on the table, and I started to give them a little friendly spiel on bears and how bears, come around this time of night, and you got to put things away promptly after you're, done preparing the food. And there was a 9-year-old boy there. His eyes got really big when I started talking about the bears. And then I was looking past them at their picnic table, and a bear came out and started eating the food. And I didn't even break my conversation. I just said, "And there's a bear right there." And this family like flipped out, and they all scrambled, and we chased the bear away, and then we put it away. So we were like heroes that day because, we let them stay. They saw a bear, and we helped save their food. So it was a cool moment to be there. And so we made new friends that night.
Yeah. If someone saved me from a bear and gave me some like bear etiquette knowledge, I'd be like, yeah, we're friends.
Yeah.
For sure.
Lifelong.
Yeah, lifelong. We're best friends, actually. Going back a little bit, thank you for sharing those crazy experiences. You both actually, obviously, Cicely, you work for the Park Service currently, but Frank, you actually used to work for the Park Service. I would love to hear a little bit about what inspired each of you to do so.
Frank?
Well, I unlike a lot of the families and the rangers that you talk to, that grew up, camping with their family, and they got inspired. I was a late bloomer, right? I only knew about Yosemite in college when I moved to the northern part of California, and a friend brought me up here, and that's where I first got exposed to it. And then I saw rangers and realized, oh, that's the kind of a job, there really is a job like that. So I sort of pivoted in the last year of college to try and, build myself resume-wise to be ready for that. And eventually I did get on as a park ranger. But it was just a great lifestyle to live and work in these places. And, and you talk to your friends about it or your family, and you say, what do you do? And you talk to them about, living in Yosemite or working as a ranger. And they go, oh my God, I always want to do that too. But so it was always gratifying to have that kind of affirmation and feedback. And it's been a great, great career and lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You've probably heard this answer before, Maddie, but for me, it was really kind of dumb luck.
Mm-hmm.
I really have always loved the outdoors. I was really lucky to grow up right next door to the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, so I was always outside. I'm the youngest of 7, so I was always chasing my older siblings around who were doing fun things in the outdoors. I went to a high school in Marin County that had a wilderness club where we got to go backpacking and river rafting, culminating with a 2-month trip to Alaska.
2 months
when we graduated,
in high school?
Amazing as we graduated. So then I was just fixated on getting back to Alaska. So really, at the time, you could apply for 2 jobs around the country. So I applied for a job in Sitka National Historical Park in Southeast Alaska and got it. I was really looking for an excuse to get back to Alaska. Yeah. I didn't know anything about the park, but it was kind of love at first sight for me working for the Park Service. It never occurred to me that I could actually do that for a living.
So now can you apply to more park?
You can, yeah. It's a whole different system now. That was in 1985, so I just finished my 40th summer in the national parks. Amazing.
Wow.
And the reason they limited that because there were so many applications. Everybody wanted to be a ranger, so they put a cap on it.
Right.
But now the lists aren't as long, which is an interesting issue. But now you can apply more broadly.
Okay. Is there a limit, or you can apply to as many open positions?
I don't think there's any limit at all. No,
I don't think.
We're eager to recruit people these days.
Yeah. I know it's interesting to see, and we might get into that later of how kind of times have turned, and it's why this conversation is so special having the both of you here. And for context for listeners, the reason I'm in Yosemite is because, and the reason the 3 of us are together is there's a conference with the National Park Friends Alliance, which brings together all of the national park nonprofit partners or friends groups, Yosemite Conservancy being one of them. And a big topic of discussion over these few days is the increasing need of the friends groups. It used to be a nice to have, now it's a need to have. Yeah, so we'll get into some of that in a bit for sure.
Great.
Kind of bouncing off of that really quick before we jump into more about Yosemite specifically. Cicely, you grew up, as you mentioned, in Marin, and in an interview, you quoted that a childhood visit to Yosemite introduced you to national parks. It captured your imagination and your heart then, and it still does. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Yosemite was the first national park I visited that I was aware of. I think I was 6 years old.
Okay.
And some friends of ours had a cabin in the Wawona part of Yosemite, which is
nice.
Which is removed from the valley. If you haven't been to Yosemite before, the valley is pretty intense and a ton of people go there. Wawona has a whole different quiet experience, and there are a lot of privately owned homes there. And I felt like I was there all summer. It was probably a week, but we were swimming in the river and sliding down the granite and running around in the woods. And it was kind of in those days when you could your parents would send you outside and say, come home for dinner. It was it felt like a little bit nice. Like heaven, total freedom. We even don't try this at home. In those days, we even fed the deer, which was, of course, a big no-no now and kind of dangerous, but it seemed really cool to me when I was 6.
Yeah, of course. Cicely and I, when we were walking over to do this interview, we shared a little bit about our shared experience doing Half Dome together. We did not do it together, but where we camped at, what is it, Little Yosemite Valley?
Little Yosemite Valley.
And then you get a little bit higher up, and then you get to come down and swim in the river. And so you just saying your memories as a kid swimming in the river made me think of our shared experience.
What we didn't share is that Maddie probably went up Half Dome much faster than I did. I ended up losing a toenail on that hike. I bet you came out unscathed.
Yeah, I did. Not to brag. I was pretty peak shit. I don't know if I would come out unscathed right now, but
good on you.
At that moment, I was in good shape. So you guys, I apparently missed this in the plenary because I was setting up this, but the two of you met in the 1980s is my understanding. So I'd love to hear about that first meeting. So that adds a special dynamic to this conversation that now, however so many years later, you're getting to work together again.
Yeah, there's a great photo we had in there about us, a picture of us in 1989 in Seward, Alaska, on the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And we were sent up there by the Park Service to investigate that and protect the parklands that were going to be inundated by the oil slick. So that's where I first met Cicely, and she was at Sitka at the National Historic Park, and it was all hands on deck. Everybody was sent. I was here in Yosemite, but we went up there and tried to help do an investigation about that. So that's how we first got acquainted.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience. We were on the investigative team. I was just 4 years into my career. They kind of brought me up to do data management, but I ended up getting to fly out to Kodiak and take depositions from people and interviews as we were.
Wow.
So we were kind of assembling the case about what had happened and how it was affecting the parklands up there. Amazing landscape. Got to go on a lot of helicopter flights on these wild Alaska coasts, Aniakchak. And you would land on the beaches that looked completely pristine and step out of the helicopter and you'd sink into like 4 inches of crude oil.
Oh my gosh.
That you couldn't see from the air because the tide would bring in a fine layer of sand. So we were really trying hard to track exactly where the oil was going and how it was affecting the parks and the wildlife.
Yeah. Were you guys cleaning it up or just more so data?
There was a big cleanup operation, but
Yeah.
we were focused more on the criminal and civil case, the litigation that we knew would happen. And we were documenting, collecting evidence because, this is kind of hypothetical, but Exxon could have said, well, how do you know that oil on that beach where Cicely went was from that tanker that ran aground? So we had to collect samples at each of those locations on park beaches, and the oil has a DNA, kind of a footprint in a way too, right? A fingerprint. And so that was able to, and we got a sample from the actual tanker as well. And we were able to say, this is the oil from that boat. And we built that case. And the interesting thing was we were told to stand down and not collect anything because the Fish and Wildlife Agency was the primary federal agency because they have migratory birds and so forth. But in true Park Service fashion, we kept doing it. And Fish and Wildlife stopped collecting data. And then when years later, it came down to the court case. And the judge said, well, do you have evidence of this? And Fish and Wildlife said, unfortunately, we don't. And Park Service stood up in the courtroom and said, well, we have it all.
Wow.
So, and they were going to pay a fine anyway, but at least we were able to bolster it. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's cool. Kind of moving into some more leadership positions. You both actually spent time at Point Reyes National Seashore. Did your time overlap?
It did not.
No.
Okay. Just a quick kind of tidbit from that. I'd love to hear something that stood out to each of you from your time there, since you have that shared experience.
I'll start with that one, Frank. I spent 10 years at Point Reyes, which is way longer than I've spent anywhere else in my career. It's really a park that is close to my heart. It's like right over the hill from where I grew up. It was my first backpacking experience was out there. So many things are cool about Point Reyes. There's extraordinary wildlife. You can go out to a beach and see elephant seals in the winter all over the place. It's really fantastic. My favorite day of the year every year as superintendent was when I went out with a biologist and got to tag the elephant seals. Super fun. What's really cool about it, though, is it has designated wilderness, and it's 45 minutes to an hour from the Bay Area. I think there's something like 8 million people in the greater Bay Area. So it faces a lot of challenges. It's super popular, amazing beaches. But you can go to Point Reyes even amidst all these people and find a wilderness experience like you can in so many national parks if you're just willing to get a little bit beyond the parking lot.
Mm-hmm. I find that's true of most, as you said, most parks some of the most crowded parks, Yosemite, Yellowstone, you step off that main road
You can do it.
For 5 minutes, and
Yeah.
you're like immersed in some of the best wilderness you can
Absolutely.
experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's often referred to informally at Point Reyes as the wilderness next door because it's so close to 6 million people. And, it's like just a couple hours drive and you're in this amazing location,
Yeah.
as Cicely said. And so it's very special. And it's sort of the beginning of the wild northern California coast when you go up there. So it's quite dramatic. And I enjoyed my time there. And it's a different kind of park because it was, it had still some ranches and activity there they were the original owners of the property, so we were working with those ranches, and at that point it was all good, and it was part of the tradition. The use of the land was the traditional use.
As we get into Yosemite, Cicely, this came across time and time again as I was researching and preparing for this interview, but many times you were mentioned and highly regarded as both an outstanding and a compassionate leader. And you also mentioned in several interviews the importance of humor. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your leadership style. And I also agree that humor is very important.
Oh, 100%. These are, we have serious jobs. This is really serious work we're engaged in. To have a mission where you are focused on, talk about the long game, you're focused on generations you will never meet. We're trying to preserve these places today for generations to come. And it's kind of sobering, and it's kind of heavy. And Park Service people are so committed to the mission that they really take it to heart, and it can be a heavy load. So I just think humor is critical to maintain a little sense of personal balance, and to remind people it is serious. We have to take this work seriously. We maybe shouldn't take ourselves too seriously. And I'm a firm believer in having fun every day because life's short. We're going to do this important thing. We're going to do it for people today and for the people of the future if we're successful. But we need to enjoy it ourselves as well.
Yeah, have some fun along the way.
Absolutely.
Get a pumpkin spice latte every once in a while.
Totally. 100%.
Can you talk a little bit about how the two of you have partnered together? And I guess this could be really interesting from like a specific projects you've worked on, but then for listeners to understand, I'm sure if you've listened to all the Who Runs This Park episodes, you understand and have heard about the importance of the friends groups, but to have the both of you here and like highlight how critical the two of you are to working together would be really cool, I think, for listeners. Well,
I'll start with one. Ackerson Meadow is this project that it was a meadow, 400-acre meadow. It's an amazing wildlife habitat that was outside the park. It had originally been in the boundary, but was taken out about 15 years after the park was established because it was great grazing area. So it was always back, so the apple of our eye was to try and get that back in the park. And so in 2016, we were able to work with Trust for Public Land, and we were the lead gift. Yosemite Conservancy was the lead gift. The Trust for Public Land purchased the land, donated it to Yosemite. But the cool part of it is that not only was it saved, but now it's being restored hydrologically. The meadow is supposed to be like a sponge and pulse water out throughout the year, not just have quick runoff like in the spring runoff. But cattle grazing compacted the soil so much that the water now runs quickly off, and then the meadow dries out. So that's been fixed. So now they just finished the second year of restoration this year. But the restoration, we helped fund that too, to the tune of about $2.5 million. But Cicely's staff, who are very entrepreneurial, skilled grant writers on their own right, because most of her biologic team, they have master's degrees, PhDs. They're used to writing grants. So they wrote some grants to the state of California. Wow. And the state recognized how important this meadow was in the Sierra Nevada because the meadow's like an oasis in the forest. So the state gave $15 million to restore this meadow.
Thanks, California.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you, California, for your sponsorship.
So it's an amazing partnership that her team stepped up.
Wow.
And we didn't have to do that second phase. Yeah.
Frank's right. It is really extraordinary when you get into a place where a state is funding a federal project. Yeah. And it does just speak to the power of the importance of that meadow. It's kind of key in our climate change strategy is to restore these mountain meadows because they're really important to hold water in the landscape and build some resilience into the landscape. I'll add one more if you have time for it.
Yeah. Well, I do have one question on that, and then I do want to hear that another partner thing. What does restoration of a meadow look like? Like were you kind of redigging up the soil to make it less compact?
Well, there was gullies. There were some 10 feet deep gullies formed by the quick runoff of the water in the spring. So they filled the gully. They filled the gullies in, and they were able to fill them in, over 2 years, and then planted willows on top, and they had to divert the stream to do that. And then once the stream was diverted and then it started to rain in the winter here last year, instead of being in gullies, the water just sort of fanned out across this field, and now it will turn back into a meadow. So it's incredible that success already.
Well, and just seeing, I mean, with a little help, the restorative power of nature.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
you know, it's true in so many restoration projects. If you just take away some of the damage that we as humans have done, not intentionally, nature really knows how to bounce back.
Yeah. But then your second partnership that you've worked on.
I was going to talk a little bit about our visitor access management plan, which sounds a little bit nerdy, but as you have talked to so many superintendents, crowding and congestion in a number of national parks has become a super issue. In Yosemite, it's not a new issue for us. If you read superintendent reports like from the 1920s and 30s, they're complaining about the crowds and this isn't sustainable. So
100 years ago, oh my gosh.
It's been going on for a long time. With COVID, we suddenly, we shut down the park for about 2.5 months as we were all trying to figure out. We were super concerned, as was the public health in Mariposa County, that we would be the super spreader for this region. And it's a rural healthcare system. There's 4 hospital beds in Mariposa.
Oh my gosh.
We draw people from all over the state and the country and the world. So we really were working together with the community to figure out how to reopen safely, give people access back to their national park and find the solace that open spaces brought during COVID, but not be a super spreader for the whole region. So we piloted a reservation system kind of by necessity, and we continued that for the next 2 years. The first 2 years were really COVID driven. The third year, we had so much construction going on in the park. We had lost a lot of parking. So we're like, we need to keep this going. At the same time, we thought, this is the time. We have a moment in time where we can finally tackle this pretty difficult issue. It's pretty contentious and controversial, I must say, but it's all designed to provide a great visitor experience and preserve these resources. The long game I was talking about earlier, in 2023, we suspended it because we didn't have COVID and we didn't have the level of construction, and we were working on this longer term plan.
Right.
And we were hammered. It was it was a pretty terrible experience. It was exacerbated by just an epic winter, huge snowpack.
Yeah.
The waterfalls were fantastic and never stopped flowing all year. So people came and it was terrible. People were parking in meadows and on bike paths and in the road, and our emergency service vehicles couldn't get around. It was like the worst case scenario of what happens if you don't find some way to spread your visitation out, not limit it so much as spread it out.
Yeah.
So we're just coming to the finish line, we hope, of that planning effort. But how that ties into the Conservancy is we're really focused on figuring out a way how to make this an equitable plan. We want Yosemite to be accessible to everyone. So the Conservancy has helped us a ton in both data gathering and monitoring, so we can keep a fine-tuned system and adjust it as we need. So we have really great data around that. And also to reaching underserved communities, really targeted campaign to Spanish speakers in California, really creative campaign that I think this year had something like more than 4 million impressions to really make sure that, and that's just one underserved community, just really make sure that people know this system's in place and they can access information in a better way, in a way that works for their communities.
To give people some context, if you have never been to Yosemite, I got to go into the valley yesterday, and as I mentioned with the whole Starbucks thing, and it's technically like the reservation stopped, so I don't know if we're technically in the off season, but it was packed in the valley, and not in it like it was still very easy to get around and all of that, but I was shocked of how many people come at all seasons.
Yeah.
And so I can see the importance of implementing something like you guys have, and what Frank had mentioned, I think in the previous session earlier, was changing this messaging around it of like, instead of people being frustrated that there's a reservation, like the reason for it is 1, they get a better experience if it's not as crowded, and 2, it's actually preserving the land. And I think people are a little bit more willing to kind of abide by that when they know that the end goal is that at the end of the day, it's for the park and it's for the future generations.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think we're getting good feedback on the system. They like it.
That's great.
And they come back after their visit during the day to talk to the lodge operators and say it was a great day in the park, and they didn't have to wait in long lines.
Yeah.
But there's obviously local businesses that have a concern about it, though, because it creates uncertainty for them. If you don't have a reservation, you may not stay at that hotel outside the park. So that's where we're trying to navigate that. And Cicely's done a good job in reaching out to the local communities and the business community in particular. Like, how do we work together on this, and how do we let people know about it and they can plan ahead?
Yeah, that's cool. Frank, as you transition on from Yosemite Conservancy, I'm not sure what your timeline is with that, but I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're proud of accomplishing in your time.
Well, I think the Ackerson one is a big one. But the Mariposa Grove was sort of our biggest project that we ever did. And that was a great partnership with the park where we removed all the development from around the giant sequoia trees. Parking lots, a tram, a fueling station, a gift shop, all was removed from the grove. And all that was, some of it was eliminated completely, but the parking was moved 2 miles down below, and then you now take a shuttle bus in. Okay. So when you arrive, once that shuttle bus leaves, you just have this much more peaceful sense of arrival in this grove. And we had some before and after photos we showed the other day to our guest here at the conference, and it showed the fuel station for the tram, and all that was amongst the trees. And the trees that actually had scrape marks on them from the tram going by. So that's all been stopped and eliminated. So we feel really good about that project.
Yeah, I just talked to the Redwood National and State Park Superintendent, Steve, and he was sharing about they're doing some crazy restoration work of removing roads. And they were like, there's a lot of clear cutting and logging in the park. And so it's cool to see as we learn more about, like you said, when you were a kid, like it was okay, or it wasn't okay, but we didn't know any better almost about feeding deer. And so it's really cool to see how the Park Service is transitioning with the new knowledge that we have and actually reclaiming places of peace and solitude. And
right. We don't feed bears at the garbage dump anymore.
No.
There's
People don't watch that.
There's a lot of things we used to do that we've evolved from.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's very evident that the both of you love Yosemite. And it sounds like it holds very special meaning to both of you. So I'd love to hear if there's a specific place within Yosemite that holds that special meaning for you.
I'll start this one, so I beat Frank to the punch on it. I will first say there's so many places I haven't been yet that I'm still going to discover my favorite place. It's it is a magical place. 95% of this 750,000 acre park is wilderness, so there's much to discover. But Frank and I together, along with some friends, just a few short weeks ago, went on a week-long pack trip in the northeastern slice of Yosemite.
Cool. And
that was some of the most spectacular scenery I have ever seen. It was epic. Burro Pass and Mule Pass, and just an amazing piece of wilderness. And I'm sure there's more out there exactly like it.
For me, it would be the Cathedral Range. It's a mountain range inside the interior of Yosemite National Park.
Oh, interesting.
And it's a glacially carved, mountain range, and so you get these really classic, sharp Matterhorn type peaks, or they call them arêtes, as a glacial term. So it's really dramatic. And there's a peak called Unicorn Peak, Cathedral Peak. So these are quite dramatic and iconic things that are really special, because the other thing about that area is it's closed in the winter. So, you can drive reasonably close and do a day hike into that area in the summer, but in the winter the road's closed. So unless you're really a good backcountry skier, you can't see any of it. So it always feels special in the summertime that we can go to this place and then hike in, and it just feels, it almost feels like a church. It's called a Cathedral Peak, but it feels like a church when you're there. It's very spiritual.
I think it's similar with people experience this in sequoia groves, of the spiritual nature of it, of something I learned. And it was very obvious in my interview with the Sequoia and Kings Canyon superintendent, because I thought I misheard him when he said that the sequoia trees can be up to 3,000 years old. And so, what a privilege to have these places that we protect that create these spiritual moments.
Yeah. There is really nothing like those giant sequoias. It kind of gives me chills every time I lay hands on a 2,500-year-old tree. One of the coolest things I've ever gotten to do. We have a research team who's doing some research on giant sequoias throughout their range, including here in Yosemite. And I happened upon them one day, and they invited me to climb this tree.
What?
So I got to go to the top of a giant sequoia tree. It was really the most amazing experience I think I've ever had.
Yeah, and I was with Steve, the Redwoods superintendent, and that's a very rare experience, because it's, not open to the public to climb said trees. And so what a privilege to be able to experience that. We talked about, or I guess we haven't really talked about El Cap and Half Dome. Those are kind of the iconic Yosemite things. So I'd love to hear what it's like to manage such iconic places that people come from all over the world to see. But then also I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the lesser known areas of the park.
Lesser known, I guess I would say anywhere other than the valley. You have to go to the valley, at least once in your life, or maybe almost every visit you have to see it.
Yeah.
But it's good to get to other corners of the park. 95% of the park is wilderness. So if you have the ability, just get off the road, go in even quarter of a mile, and the noise sort of dissipates, and you might get a different glimpse of an angle of a cliff or a peak, and it makes a big difference in having that quiet thing. So that's be my advice for people. Just get out of the mainstream a little bit.
I echo that 100%. We have 800 miles of trails, and you're also free to roam across the wilderness any place you want in Yosemite. And there's magic everywhere out there. The High Sierra is unlike any place on earth. I think it's magic.
Yeah, I have yet to go on any trips, any backpacking trips in wilderness area where you can go off trail. My navigation skills are not to the correct level yet to be able to do that, but it is something I hope to.
Check out the High Sierra camps. Vogelsang is an amazing place.
Okay, noted. Again, I joke and I say this pretty much every interview that it's getting excessive. My bucket list, talking to all the superintendents.
You might not have that many years left in your life, Maddie. I don't know.
No,
You're still pretty young.
I know. But it's just and I felt that yesterday coming to Yosemite. This is my second time being here. Both times pretty quick. I hope to come for a longer period of time and go somewhere aside from the valley. But it's every time I come, there's more places I want to go within the park. And you could come here a whole lifetime and still have places to explore. And both of you have worked here, and it sounds like you're still learning places and things and all of that. That's awesome. Another thing that's interesting about Yosemite is portions of the JMT, so the John Muir Trail, and the PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail, go through Yosemite. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, what that means from a management perspective, a permitting perspective, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can start on that one, Frank, and toss it to you if you know more than I do. That provides a really interesting opportunity for us to work with all the other land managers who also manage portions of that trail, of those trails. So we have a really outstanding relationship with all of our surrounding national forests and other areas that manage a piece of that trail. And we work together on the permitting system because there's a quota at every trailhead. So it has to be a really well put together, seamless system. And actually, the Conservancy is quite involved in that.
Right. We contract with the park to help in the Wilderness Center as far as the reservations program, because it's a pretty intense crush of requests to get on the John Muir Trail. And Half Dome is part of that thing, because people want to go to Half Dome, and it's kind of a mixed thing, right? You can go to Half Dome for the day, and you don't need a permit. But if you're going to be hiking through on the trail, and you say you're going to start in Yosemite Valley at the trailhead of the John Muir Trail, and you're going to go up that route, and then Half Dome is right there, can you get permission to go up to the top of the dome as well while you're in nearby? So there's complexities to the permit for that. So we help with all that, and we actually have a special arrangement with recreation.gov, which is the general purveyor of reservation systems across the country for the parks. So we actually sort of provide a concierge service in a way. We're a help desk. So, the call center at rec.gov is not going to know the details of how the intricacies of Half Dome and all these things. So we have a way of working with the park rangers, and we have good staff that know the area, and we kind of can size people up, but they call and say, hey, I have to hike a half a mile in the first night. Do you have any recommendations of where I should camp? And then you kind of get into a conversation of well, how many times have you hiked, and what kind of gear do you have? And so we can kind of prevent some maybe problems that might emerge from people maybe getting into trouble or being ill prepared. So it's a nice kind of a partnership we have with Cicely's team and the rangers on that. Yeah. So, and there's a big crush, as I said, because I think it's the Instagram phenomenon. Everybody wants to do the John Muir Trail, or they want to go to Half Dome. So there's a lot of requests to go on these things, and we're sort of the front line on that, of saying sorry, or here's how we can help you.
Yeah, I fall under the Instagram curious to do John Muir Trail, because I had never heard of it until this summer, and I had a friend who did part of it, and then followed a couple people on Instagram who recapped it. And I mean, that's for sure on the bucket list. That's a little bit more doable than the PCT.
Yeah.
I think it's a good place to start.
Right.
Yeah, I might be calling in a few years.
Right. Good.
We'll be ready for you.
Yeah. Be like, hello, what do I do? Please help me. Before we jump into, I guess we'll follow this trend a little bit, but Yosemite is also a climber's haven. And I learned this yesterday, actually, that October is called Rocktober, which is fun. Can you share a little bit more about the culture of climbing at Yosemite, and again, how that affects management?
Yeah, rock climbing at Yosemite, it's a really cool thing. And we really are the center of the universe, literally,
Yes.
for big wall climbers. So all the most elite climbers in the world congregate in Yosemite, particularly this time of year during Rocktober. If you go down to El Cap Meadow at night, you can see lights all over El Cap where people or climbers are spending the night on those little portaledges.
So
It's
crazy.
a fascinating time of year. Historically, the Park Service and the climbers had a pretty contentious relationship.
Really?
Probably in your day, Frank,
Yeah,
you could
we
probably
did.
talk about that.
Yeah.
Today, it's not like that at all. We have a really extraordinarily good relationship
Wow.
with the climbing community. The Conservancy funds some of our climbing rangers. We have a whole Ask a Climber program. I'll toss that to Frank.
Yeah, when I was a ranger here, I was on the night shift in the valley back in the day. So
Whoa.
there was a sort of a cat and mouse game because there's a 14-day camping limit in Yosemite. But if you're a climber, you sort of want to be here most of the summer to climb, right? So
Yeah.
there was this cat and mouse thing where they would be camping off out of bounds or in the rocks in the talus slope, and we'd be like trying to find them. And so there was a tension there between the rangers and the climbers. That changed over time in a good way. And part of it was Conservancy grants providing more education, because like if you have a peregrine falcon nest on this climbing route, we're able to now share together. We'll say, hey, this climbing route's going to be closed, guys, because the birds are nesting there. And the climbers get it. They go, oh, well, we love the birds. We love, they're beautiful. So can you tell me a different route? And there's much more cooperation now, whereas before they kind of might be rogue about it, like, hey, we're going up anyway. So, and they also recognize the phenomenon of climbing gyms has brought a lot more climbers to the parks, because if you can actually get pretty good in a climbing gym and you build the confidence, then when you come up here, there's just much more people that are capable of doing this. And before it was much more kind of limited just by who can climb that 3,000 foot cliff, right? So there's a popularity to this now that we have to work with the climber community on. But fortunately, it's better than it's ever been as
Yeah.
far as the relationship.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And is it still a 14-day limit?
It is,
for
and
folks?
this, and the way that we're on that is we have this rescue site at Camp 4 where some of the best climbers, if they agree to sign on as rescue climbers on call, they can stay there all year.
Wow.
And so they have these wall tents that we helped put in, and that's the trade-off, right? The exchange is like, okay, you can stay and climb whenever you want, but if there's a rescue and we call you, you guys need to show up.
Yeah.
And then they go on the payroll for that, how long it takes, the day or two, they're on the payroll
Yeah.
for the rescue. So it's a good partnership, because if you think about it, if someone got in trouble on the cliff, a climber on a cliff, you need someone better than them to get them down safely, right? So and the rangers are pretty good climbers, but you almost need elite level
You need the
people
best
to,
climbers in the world.
right.
Yeah, it's a
You
really
need Alex Honnold.
totally.
Yeah, right.
It's a fantastic partnership. We call them the SAR sighters, search and rescue sighters.
Wow.
And there's Camp 4 down in the valley, and Tuolumne Meadows also has a SAR site in the summertime.
Wow.
And they are absolutely vital to amplify our search and rescue efforts. Really, we couldn't do it without them. And some of those climbers have gone on to become park rangers. The Valley District Ranger at the moment came from Camp 4 SAR sighter, as
Wow.
have many others. So it's a kind of a pipeline for us for our ranger team as well.
There's a funny story I heard yesterday from one of our board members at the Friends Alliance.
Uh-huh.
Her husband's works for the Access Fund, which is about climber access. So they deal with policy issues on climbing routes with Park Service across the country. So he brought his daughter here to the conference, and they were talking with Alex Honnold, the famous climber. And this young girl, she's, I don't know, I guess, and she's probably like 12 or something, maybe a little older. And she said, well, what do you think I should do when I'm here? Because she's a climber too. And he said, if you haven't been to Yosemite before, you have to go see the giant sequoia trees. And we were all shocked that was the first thing that Alex suggested,
Wow.
which shows, and he told her some more climbing stuff too, but it was like, that was the first thing that he suggested. Like, he was really passionate about it. Like, you got to go see those trees if you've never done it. So I thought that was really great coming from Alex, who's,
Yeah, you think he'd be like, just send it on El Cap.
Right, right.
Just kidding. I mean,
Yeah.
he doesn't promote
So
that. But
yeah, it was really cool to hear.
yeah, that's awesome. And I think I love to hear that relationship has really improved over time. And I think it shows also just the education of people pursuing these rad outdoor things of like, the outdoors is our playground. So we need to protect those places and kind of seeing it as more of a like caretaking steward.
Absolutely. It's like any partnership, really. It's sharing the mission of preserving these places for today and forever.
Yeah, exactly. One question for you, Cicely, before we wrap up with our final question. But Cicely, you're the second female to lead Yosemite as superintendent, and you were mentored by BJ Griffin, who was the first female superintendent of Yosemite. So I'd love to hear what that means to you, both being mentored and being the second woman to lead this, awe-inspiring place.
It's kind of amazing to me. I almost still can't believe it. 5 years into this job, I still can't believe I have it. BJ was a spectacular mentor. She was here at Yosemite for the 1997 flood, a really time of epic change. She's kind of been an inspiration to me as we face sort of the epic change of a reservation system, of some way to manage visitation so that we can better protect this place. So I worked for BJ. She left Yosemite and came to the Presidio of San Francisco where I was working.
Cool.
I learned from her over a couple years until she retired. And she's come back to visit me just before COVID. She came to visit up here and got to visit me. I'm living in the house she lived in when she was here. So it was pretty fun. And we happened to be having a women's panel that week that the staff had put together. So there was BJ there to sit on the panel. In that era, it was incredibly unusual to have a female superintendent at one of these big parks. It's still a little bit rare, but it happens a lot more often. So I'm really, I feel like dumb luck again. I feel like I was in the right place at the right time, and it's important. It's important to be a mentor for those who come after us, and I'm really honored to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing about BJ Griffin is I heard about her through Chip Jenkins, the Grand Teton superintendent, because I think he was working at Yosemite during that flood and kind of mentioned her bravery and all of that. So thank you for sharing that. As we wrap things up, what is something you wish everyone knew about Yosemite? And this is for both of you. It's my question I ask at the end of every interview. What's something you wish everyone knew about Yosemite, regardless if they've been or not? And a new question I've asked is, what's a common misconception or myth about Yosemite you'd like to debunk?
I'll start. I'll say, I hope everyone knows, or at least learns when they come to this park, is that this was really where it all began. The idea of 1864 that, this land was set aside, because that had never happened before in the world, that it wasn't, as Ken Burns said in his film, like it wasn't just like the king's forest or preserve. It was anyone could come visit. So the fact that it was done in the middle of the Civil War still blows me away. And I've read about that. It's like, how could that have been? And what were they thinking? How did they have time to think to set aside something like this? So that's an important moment to think. And it was also the trees. It wasn't the cliffs, just the cliffs and waterfalls. It was the sequoias that sort of maybe tipped the scale that why this was like unbelievable kind of a landscape. So that's the one I would suggest that people kind of ponder and think about, because now as we bring it forward to today, we still have to preserve Yosemite and keep it safe and accessible to everyone. But then and then keep it relevant to the new audiences, the younger people coming in. So.
Yeah, I'll just riff on that a little bit. That is perfect. Yosemite really was the birthplace of the conservation idea, both in this country and around the world.
Yeah.
So like you have probably found as you've been doing these around the country, there's more to every park than the story that most people know.
100%.
Like people know the story of the scenery of Yosemite because it's, kind of in your face spectacular, but there's so much more like the creation of the national park system that really emanated from what happened here in 1864. And has affected the whole planet, and it all started right here. So it's and like every other park, there's lesser known stories that we're trying to do a better job of telling, like the influence of the Chinese workers who were here building the roads in Yosemite, which is just a story we've only very recently begun to tell with the help of the Conservancy. Story of the Buffalo Soldiers. Really, people can find themselves here even if they think this is not a space where people look like them have been. That might not be the case.
Yeah, thank you to the both of you. I loved getting to chat with you in person, and it was fun to hear. Again, I think the work the two of you do together is exceptional, and what a cool opportunity for listeners to hear, not just about Yosemite and the superintendent, but also the Yosemite Conservancy and everything that they help make possible. So thank you both for your time.
Thank you. Super fun.
Thank you, Maddie. It's great to talk with you.
Thanks so much for listening today. Our music was composed by Danielle Bees. If you liked this podcast, rate, review, download, and tell your friends about it. This ensures the stories of our national parks and how they are run are shared. Listen to the other episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts, or visit us at whorunthispark.com to learn more. I'm Maddie Pellman, and you've been listening to Who Runs This Park.